Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Hello, Noble Mind listeners. In this episode, we talked to Shaun Glossop about his work building a mindfulness group outside the usual religious or medical contexts in which it's often taught. We talked about what he did to reduce the barriers to engaging with mindfulness by finding ways to make practice more accessible and relatable to people in his community. Shaun Glossop is the co-founder and director of the Nottingham Mindfulness Center and has been a meditation practitioner for over 25 years. As always, if you are a fan of Noble Mind, you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter, and join our free Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/NobleMind. You can also learn all about our show, get our show notes, and join our email list at noblemindpodcast.com. Enjoy the show. We are here with Shaun Glossop today. Welcome to Noble Mind. I'm looking forward to getting to know you and hearing about your work. Maybe you can start us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you're all about.
Yeah, sure. Kind of to my considerable surprise, I found myself as a meditation teacher, and in particular, a mindfulness teacher. My teaching qualification is in something called MBCT, which is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. To my considerable surprise, I found myself in kind of the latter portion of life teaching. Back in my hometown, which is Nottingham. Nottingham's it's a city technically, but it's not a vast city, fairly substantial one, and it's in the middle of England for anybody that's kind of unfamiliar with the geography. And that was where I was born and grew up, and had my childhood, early part of my life through to mid-20s. And then I did what was very typical for people of my generation, and particularly within the Nottingham area, and I moved away. And life and career ambitions took me off down to London. And I lived for 30 plus years in London, pursuing a career relatively successfully, socializing, having a life, and kind of enjoying life thoroughly in London. And then events changed within life. And in particular, this was to do with aging parents back in Nottingham and that whole kind of midlife phase. And somewhat unexpectedly, I found myself moving back to Nottingham with my partner, which was itself a revelation. It made me fully appreciate how much I'd lost contact with the place whilst I'd been away. Of course, I'd been visiting 2 or 3 times a year whilst I'd been away, but that mostly consisted of just visiting family. And it was really quite strange in moving back to Nottingham, because it was almost like having moved to a new city. And I had quite a bit of dissonance going on, because I had this idea in my head that I knew Nottingham, but the Nottingham that was living in my head was like 30 years ago. So it was an interesting experience in suddenly finding myself somewhere both familiar and new and strange and different all at once. And of course, it was tied in with a lot of upheaval in my life and to do with some difficult circumstances with parental care and that type of thing. And anyway, I just did that completely bonkers thing that some people, me included, do in middle age, and decided to kind of throw up the career that I've been pursuing relatively successfully for the last 25 years and turn an interest into my occupation. And my passion in life had been for many years, and had been meditation for well over 25 years. At that point, I had an active meditation practice, and I've been very fortunate whilst I was living in London being a big cosmopolitan city, to have the opportunity to study under some very well-regarded British meditation teachers, actually across a number of different meditation streams and meditation systems. To my surprise, I discovered that Nottingham, having moved back here and then made this mad decision to have a career change and actually turn a personal passion and a personal interest into my work life, I discovered that Nottingham is one of the very few places in the UK where locally you can actually train to be an MBCT teacher. And that was fortunate, because MBCT happened to be a strand of meditation that interested me and that I thought I would feel quite comfortable teaching, would be interested in teaching. So I duly enrolled for a almost 2-year part-time training course, which at that time, it's slightly different now, but at that time it was run as a kind of a joint training project by the University of Nottingham, which is quite a well-regarded university in the UK, and the local provider of mental health services for the local region. And that worked out really well. So I completed the training and duly began to teach, set up the Nottingham Mindfulness Group, which is the group that I run together with Jamie. And it kind of went surprisingly well. It just found its own legs and did its own thing. And in relative terms, bearing in mind that Nottingham is a provincial city, not a huge place, it's been within its own terms and its own point of reference really quite successful. Been teaching and we've been running the Nottingham Mindfulness Group for over 10 years now, and it's probably fair to say that it's the number one point of contact now in Nottingham for anyone who's thinking that mindfulness might be helpful for them, for their mental health, for emotional health, but also it's become a primary point of contact just for anybody who thinks they might have an interest in meditation more broadly. And that's resulted in us building very good relationships. We have 2 different Buddhist centres in Nottingham. They each belong to different Buddhist denominations, and we have very good relationships with them. We have very good relationships with mental health services in Nottingham. I now also work in teaching, mindfulness teaching and BCT, and I also work within the drug and alcohol rehabilitation services in the local. So that's kind of the CV. That's kind of the professional overview. But there's more to it than that, because when I decided that I wanted to teach, I was quite keen, and it was really one of the drivers behind doing it. I really wanted to see if I could find a way of making it palatable and appealing, but also easy for people to engage with, regardless of what their personal life circumstances are, regardless of what their personal needs were, regardless of where they were in the socio-economic hierarchy. That's something that's quite relevant in Nottingham, because Nottingham is an amazing city. It's a wonderful place. It's got an awful lot going for it, but it's one of these places that has a industrial past. And over the last 70 years, that whole side of the city, which was the principal aspect of its economy and economic activity, has been completely hollowed out and has completely gone. And it's a city that has, I think most people would agree, I'm not being unfair, it's a city that's struggled in many ways to reinvent itself and to kind of find a new place in the world, but in particular to find forms of prosperity and kind of well-being. And consequently, it has suffered on the economic front significantly over the last 70 odd years. And of course, it's developed all the social problems that come as part of that. And I thought it would be interesting to try and reach out with meditation and mindfulness to everyone, but particularly the people in those type of circumstances, where there's not only going to be an economic inhibition to engaging with anything like this, but often one where there would be a real sense of that's really not for me. And I have no idea whether this is mirrored in the States or not, but meditation and mindfulness here in the UK has very much become part of a broader, very commercialized wellness industry that is very white, and it is very middle class, and it is principally female. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with any of those things, but as a result of that, it has an image problem if you're trying to persuade people in certain socioeconomic bands that actually this is something that's for you, and this is something that you might find helpful and you might find some benefit from. And for many people, it's all a bit alien, it's a bit strange, it's a bit kind of woo-woo, but also it's very much associated with lifestyle and class issues that are a barrier for people and actually would put people off. This was where what I was wanting to do was completely mad, you see, because instead of just coming along and thinking, fantastic, I would like to teach meditation, I'd like to teach mindfulness, there's a whole established industry here, that appears to be doing quite well and kind of prospering. Let's just hop on board and let's just do what everybody else is doing. And no, I was kind of mad enough to think, no, let's try and do something different. Let's try and break the mold. Let's try and offer it in a different way. But also let's see if we can throw the doors open to everybody and get everybody in. And I had no idea what I was doing. And there wasn't a plan either, because we've been relatively successful. And I really must qualify that. I mean, what we do is tiny. We're one small teaching organisation in a kind of a mid-sized, middle-ranking city in a not prosperous part of a little island off the coast of Europe. It really isn't anything of any great significance, but it has generated a bit of an interest from elsewhere, including from the States, who've noticed what we're doing and have come along and taken a look and kind of goes, oh, this is interesting. But when people come and look at what we do now, it's always with an attitude of, what was the plan? What was the strategy? And I often feel quite awkward and a bit daft because it's kind of, there wasn't one. We just thought, let's feel our way through this and see what we could do. I was just aware that I didn't want the sessions and groups and classes that we did, I didn't want them to feel unduly religious or spiritual. I have absolutely nothing against that. And my own personal practice is a faith-based practice. But I didn't want it to feel like it was Buddhist or that it was some kind of temple or church activity. But neither did I want it to feel terribly medicalized and that it was where you go if you've got problems with mental health or whatever. And I wanted it to feel comfortable for everybody. And I also wanted to try and achieve a way of doing that whereby if you've got no money, it would still be possible to come along. And more by accident than design, although there was a bit of serendipity in it, actually, I do have to say, because we had a fantastic venue just fall into our lap and just become available to us. It was a brand new cafe, restaurant, bar, done in quite a kind of trendy way, bang in the Nottingham city centre. It was new, it was opening. They were looking for events and things to happen there. It was quite interesting. So it's a restaurant, cafe, bar. It was odd because it's run in conjunction with the Drug and Alcohol Recovery Services in Nottingham. So it doesn't serve alcohol. We were basically offered the use of the place one night a week. And I was already playing with the idea, look, if I don't want it to be religious and spiritual, or at least not to have that flavour to it, and I don't want it to be clinical and medicalised either. And again, with no disrespect to anybody, I don't want it to feel kind of new age or woo-woo either. I just want it to feel normal. But what does that mean? We've been played about with the idea, well, it needs to feel like a social group. It needs to feel like something that you come to if this is of interest to you or you think it could be of interest to you. I mean, we wanted it to be completely unpretentious, for it to be very grounded and for it to feel very normal. And the opportunity to have a go at doing that in actually a very smart and very pleasant cafe bar, but one that itself had no pretensions. It wasn't trying to be some kind of high-flying, kind of exclusive wine bar or something posh or glitzy. It was a very nicely done interior, but it itself was trying to be very grounded and very normal and kind of open to anybody that would be interested in coming along. And it just worked. It just worked. Everything unfolded from there. It kind of led itself. And any changes, any new activities we did, anything new we introduced, it arose out of the group. It was led by what was happening within the group. I didn't want it to be religious, and I didn't want it to feel overly spiritual, and I didn't want it to feel kind of fluffy new age, and I didn't want it to feel clinical and medicalized. We decided to use snippets of video and film footage and whatever and work that in. So the answer was to mix it. So we would feature a video clip by a Buddhist teacher, followed by a video clip by a monk, followed by a leading university professor or a psychologist coming from a more scientific point of view. And we just mixed it up so that it was kind of neutral. It was palatable to everybody because it wasn't weighted one way or another. And it was always an even mix, giving different points of view all around the same subject.
Having attended a few months worth of teachings with Shaun, I must say that that method I find very compelling, very powerful to have snippets of renowned teachers. It's a bit like footnoting. Instead of, well, this person thinks this, you realize, all the big guns. I find that very effective.
You're absolutely right, Alex, because it opened up the opportunity to let the guys who were coming to the classes and coming to the meetings and coming to the session to hear it from the horse's mouth. They didn't have to rely on this bloke off the street standing in front of them and telling them this was how it is, or this is what the science said. They could hear it from the mouths of the very people who've done the research, the people who are leading this movement, this development kind of on a global basis. And we could then have a conversation around it. And back in those days, because this was all pre-pandemic, of course, and things have changed a little bit since pandemic, but back in those days, these were in-person meetings. So this was a group of people meeting in a social environment in a cafe bar, which had the benefit of having a huge video wall, which we were able to use videos. It had full PA system to relay sound. He worked quite hard at creating a very social environment and a very relaxed and a very welcoming environment. There were refreshments and things available. We made sure that certain refreshments, including a cup of tea, were free. So that if you'd arrived, paid a nominal admission, and that was it, you haven't got another penny in your pocket, you wouldn't stand out. It would be obvious to anybody else that you'd got no money in your pocket, because you could still walk up to the refreshments counter and come away with a cup of tea, some refreshments and things. No one would have any idea. You'd perhaps chosen those refreshments because you couldn't pay for anything else. It was always about making sure that everybody felt that everyone was on an absolute level playing field the moment they were through the door, and that nobody felt awkward in any way, shape or form. So it was a very social environment. We've had loads of really good friendships. We've got people who are married couples who met.
You start advertising that way, you're going to have people banging down the doors.
Yeah, and it worked really well. It's shifted now. There was a big culture change as a result of the pandemic. We still do an in-person event once a month, but the demand now is for most of it to be online. So it was about a shared experience where we were immersing ourselves in videos, in periods of guided meditation, me speaking, guest speakers coming in quite often.
I think that the atmospherics, as you're describing, sound really facilitative of a different kind of experience than people have at a lot of meditation centers, Buddhist temples, yoga centers, woo-woo-wee places. Something about like just socializing in a cafe together. It's like the context tells you something about how to behave. And when you're in like a meditation hall, people are quiet and less social, and you might make eye contact but not really talk. And, when you're in a cafe, what do? You talk, you socialize, you grab a tea, you sit down next to someone and converse. And you have sounds like these great videos to help with conversation and stuff like that. So.
And we also, when it's an in-person meeting, which is sadly something that we've never been able to recreate successfully within the Zoom meetings, but at the in-person meetings, it always began with an invitation. We took a couple of minutes, and it always began with an invitation for people to look around them. I always used to say in the immediate vicinity, just where you're sitting. If there's anyone close by who you don't know or you haven't yet had a chance to introduce yourself to, please do it now. So we always opened up with people introducing themselves to each other, and that added to that social dynamic.
Is there anything different about how you teach in terms of what you emphasize as you teach mindfulness in this kind of setting with this group of folks that are maybe not the usual crowd at a meditation center?
That's a really interesting question, because that's evolved over the time that we've been doing it. So that has kind of constantly changed as we've done it. The common strand all the way through would be that we focus very much on, look, here is a set of tools that you could use if you want to, that will help to support your internal well-being, your mental well-being, your emotional well-being. If you feel you've got too much stress in your life, if you have issues where you're sometimes anxious, if you've got a history of depression or whatever, these are tools you might find useful. Come along and have a go and see what you think, see if you think it's for you. So that side of things has been consistently all the way through, and that's very much often what we center our presentation around. But it has moved and developed a bit, perhaps as we've become a bit more skilled at what we're doing, certainly as we've got to know increasingly well the mix of people and the type of people that we get coming through. And we include far more teaching and material these days that's intended as a non-preachy encouragement to people to reconnect. So we feature themes like common humanity now, perhaps far more at the forefront than we did originally. And in the early days when we featured common humanity, it would have been very much in the context of being part of the approach for self-compassion. And of course, we still teach that, but we teach it more broadly now. We focus more on encouraging people to arrive at an understanding that everyone has problems, everyone has got difficulty and challenge. That's the thing that unites us. That's the thing that makes us all the same. And whereas it's helpful to know that to help you manage your own internal dynamics when you're facing difficulty, it's what everybody else faces this too. But actually, we expand it now so that people can recognize. And in a place like Nottingham, where there are a lot of social issues, there's a lot of economic deprivation, there are some real difficulties going on, it's something that's become more meaningful and more important to us as what we've done has evolved.
Yeah, I think the common humanity piece, as it connects to building community and the space that you've created, also feels like it must, the very synergistic kind of, those teachings, and then also that atmosphere and culture that you're creating there. And yeah, the emphasis on like, here's a toolbox, try it out, see if it works. Maybe it won't, Yeah,
and that's how we've always done it. So we've always been very careful. We're not interested in being preachy.
Yeah.
We're not interested in handing down expert advice. It's very much about, hey, you've got some really interesting tools and techniques. There's a whole load of science that says they work, but have a go. See what you think. Try it out for yourself. What's your experience? Come back and tell us. Share your experience.
Yeah, we have a lot of communities in the US that I think are sort of similar to what you're describing in terms of the kind of post-industrial kind of, especially on the East Coast, I think in New England, a lot of cities that were once thriving but are now struggling as economies have changed. And the class issues, I think, are really a big deal to pay attention to. And I'm really appreciating that part of what you're saying here. And the way that folks who are in communities that are more kind of down and out, can have this tendency to feel like there's some expert or authority, doctor, whomever, or, well-intended person, who's granted themselves some authority to come in and start a meditation center, that you're going to be the expert, who's going to tell them, these poor downtrodden folks, like, what to do and what the right thing is. And that never works. But it sounds like you're really not doing that. And I imagine that's part of what's working, is that your sensibilities don't really allow for that.
I'm certainly very conscious of that. We try not to take ourselves too seriously. I don't mean that we're flippant about what we teach or whatever. But, I'm very aware, kind of, who am I? I'm just kind of some bloke, kind of off the streets of Nottingham. Okay, I have a personal interest in this. I've immersed myself in it. By it, I mean meditation, of course, meditation over many years and whatever. And I personally have got a lot from it, but I wouldn't dream of thinking that means it's some universal panacea that needs to be imposed on everybody else. And yeah, I've trained and I've been trained and qualified as an MBCT teacher, but I don't have any delusion that makes me some kind of higher authority in any of this. And many of the experiences of teaching as well have been extremely humbling, and something I'm really aware of, very aware of, both from our bigger group sessions, which are the type of session we've really been talking about so far, but we also run classes and courses which we work really hard to try and make as accessible as possible. And we still get that real cross-section, that real mix of people within those classes and courses. And it's incredibly humbling when people discover for themselves that they've got this reservoir of peace and this capacity for strength and resilience within themselves that they hadn't realized was there, and that so far no one's encouraged them to have a look, dig down. But the reason it's humbling is they've discovered it through their own work. I and other mindfulness and meditation teachers can sit there talking to them blue in the face. Unless people do it, unless people actually do the heavy lifting of implementing the practices in their own lives. And it's not easy amidst all the stresses and pressures of life. Many of the people we see, parents, sometimes with young kids, many of them are working 2 jobs. Many of them have got real stresses around paying the rent and this type of thing. Yet somehow, in amongst all of that pressure, these people are meditating for 40 minutes a day. These people are using the breathing space or just conscious breathing at intervals through the day and have become really skilled, thank you, at regulating their own emotions, even though they're sometimes in some quite extreme circumstances in terms of the pressures that they're under, and they're perfectly entitled to be highly reactive in a certain sense, because of the real difficulties they're facing. But they've recognized for themselves that it doesn't help them. It just makes the situation worse. And they've invested the time and the effort, despite the pressures they're under, they've invested the time and the effort to teach, to master this, and to learn how to do it. And that I find inspiring and humbling. That these people who very often have incredibly tough lives, and as I say, are under fantastic pressure, and yet they've done the work and they have carved out the time in the day to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day or whatever it might be, and have found it transformative for them. And that's amazing to see. And that's where I get the real buzz from, the real benefit from, when we see that happening.
Reminds me of the Buddhist teachings around the different realms of existence and how human life is considered to be sort of ideal because you have enough suffering that you're motivated to practice, unlike, say, a God realm or other realms where there's so much suffering that you're just drowning in it and you don't have you're not able to sort of pull your focus in enough to practice at all. The sort of what you're describing feels like there's sort of very human experience of like, yes, I'm suffering, and the suffering is part of what inspires me to like figure out how to get it together because this shit's hard.
And again, this is part of what I find impressive and inspiring, is that people who can be in a real low point in life and have had some seriously rough stuff to deal with. And I mean this in a wholly appropriate way. When you see those people identify the fact that, okay, well, this is how it is. And the only thing that's going to improve the situation here is me. Is if I get to grips with this, and if I do the work, and if I do the heavy lifting, then I might not be able to solve the problems, but I'll be in a place where I can handle the situation better. And seeing people do that, as I say, sometimes in quite extreme difficulty, it's hugely impressive, hugely impressive.
We liked what you wrote about alienation.
For me, it's a realization that has arisen out of the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years. I was probably very guilty at the beginning of thinking that people who were suffering a lot with depression or anxiety or other issues needed better skills. And that sounds a horribly condescending attitude to have had. The big lesson for me, in part through my own life, actually, because I've not had the easiest ride of it over the last 10 years, but particularly through teaching that we've done and the groups that we've worked with and the classes that we've led, is gradually, I have properly awoken to the fact that, in my humble opinion, the driver behind the mental health crisis that we're having across the West and certainly across the United Kingdom, and there are many and complicated factors. These are certainly a big part of it. He says, waving his mobile phone in the air. But it's alienation. It is alienation that is really at the core of this. As human beings, we are not designed to kind of live as a silo where we are in competition to the degree that we find ourselves with others, and where the whole weight of having to find your way through life weighs down very heavily on you. And I was recognizing something, and I would have really struggled to identify what I was seeing or to have labeled it or to have described it. But the more we were working with this cross-section of people, normal, ordinary people off the streets of this kind of middling city in England, the more I was saying, there's an issue here, there's a common theme here. And then for me, it was brought into focus by the amazing work of Johan Hari when he published his book Lost Connections. That was a complete light bulb moment for me, and I suddenly realized that's it. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're witnessing. And more recently, Gabor Mate has talked a lot around this. Gabor he's borrowed the 4 alienations that Karl Marx talked about in his early teaching. Marx had identified that, in his opinion, there were 4 forms of alienation that capitalism was creating. And the alienation was for people to be alienated from themselves, to be alienated from each other, to be alienated from nature, and to be alienated from meaningful work. And Gabor Mate has taken that and done work around that and expanded and speaks incredibly powerfully around it. It overlaps completely with the work that Johan Hari has done because of his own personal history of significant struggles with long-term depression and anxiety. He's done a lot of research, a lot of exploration of this, and identified. He breaks it down into what he calls 7 disconnections. But again, it covers the same type of ground. So it includes a disconnection from meaningful work. It includes a disconnection from nature. He's a little bit more specific in some of his. So his includes a disconnection from hope and seeing a positive future for yourself. He also includes disconnection from childhood trauma is one of his. But this is all of a piece, and it's this realization that we're disconnected from each other, we're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from the natural environment. I mean, you've only got to look at what is happening in terms of environmental disaster that is unfolding. We're completely alienated from nature. And then this very interesting one, of course, and for many people that we see in our classes, in our courses, whether it's online, whether it's in person, a significant alienation from meaningful work. And finding that what you're doing to put bread and butter on the table and whatever is mind-bendingly monotonous and unfulfilling. And not only is the work itself soul-destroying, you feel utterly unappreciated. What you do, you're perhaps unappreciated in terms of 0 positive feedback, 0 thank you within the organisation you're working in. In the case of many of the people we see, these people feel thoroughly unappreciated in terms of what they're being paid for their time, which very often isn't enough to live off at any decent level. When people have got all this going on, they've probably moved cities, so they're away from family networks and those type of support networks. They're in soul-destroying work that is not paying well, probably spending very little time in contact with nature. This accumulates very quickly. I would say, in my opinion, but that's not right. It's what I feel we see on a very regular basis is people who are atomized individuals who find that there is very little available to them or going on within their lives that is genuinely meaningful and that is genuinely nourishing and nurturing to them as a being. That's, again, probably one of the changes in the way we teach in the material that we present, because we try increasingly, we will mention stuff about the importance of spending time in nature. We will encourage people to contemplate engaging with gratitude work. Again, the common humanity thing is important here. It's ways of helping people to reconnect in whatever perhaps quite small ways might be available to them. And of course, the pandemic was a disaster for this, absolute disaster for this. People literally being cut off from meaningful physical contact with other human beings.
Yeah, it's beautifully put, and wonderful resources you've mentioned there around exploring themes of alienation more in our current world. It sounds like you are trying to do your small part to reduce that with the community you've created and the teachings that you offer. So thank you on behalf of humanity for what you're doing.
Thank you.
I think that it's about time for us to wrap up. Maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about where to find you and more about your work and your teaching on the interweb or in the real life world.
Our main point of contact is we have a website, which is Nottingham Mindfulness Group. That's all one word, nottinghammindfulnessgroup.co.uk, because we're based in the UK. We have a weekly meeting on Thursday evenings. And as I say, that is now available on Zoom. And although it's principally caters for people in our local vicinity, one of the upsides of life on Zoom post the pandemic is we do have a sprinkling of people now that join us from much farther afield. We've got 3 people who regularly participate from different places within the United States. We have people who get involved now from kind of South Africa, from Brazil, and of course further afield within the UK as well.
And you might even see Alex there.
You do.
Wonderful.
And the details for that can all be found on the website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shaun. This was lovely. Really great to chat and hear more about your work and get to know you better. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.